This is why I'm very honored to introduce and welcome on the stage a very courageous woman. She was named one of the most influential people in climate policy worldwide in 2022 by Apolitical. She's both a passionate explorer for National Geographic, an advocate for Arctic climate policy, and the founder and director of Preserving Legacies. Let me introduce and welcome Victoria Herrmann. Thank you.
As a National Geographic explorer, I like to position all of my talks in place. And so I want to take you on a journey today to somewhere exotic, Paramus, New Jersey. Paramus is my hometown, and among the smog-filled highways and overcrowded shopping malls, I took comfort in knowing that the cathedrals that America built to art, the Guggenheim, the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney, were just a stone throw away. And on a clear day, if you stood at the height of my town, you could see the vertical mappings of Manhattan. Most of my trips to these art museums were made from New Jersey to Manhattan by way of the Bronx. It is there, on a street of forgotten histories and broken windows, that my family's factory has stood from one generation to the next. On Sundays, my father and his father, both Renaissance men of small business manufacturing, would take me to the factory, and they would catch up on the week's work. Welding in a dimly lit corner, I would be folding boxes in the office. And as the sun dipped over the horizon, they would fulfill an early morning promise to travel across the Harlem River and go to my favorite museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. If I close my eyes still today, I can touch the happiness that I felt as the three of us ascended those marble stairs and got lost in the picturing of the past. My most memorable childhood moment was made on one of these ritual car rides from the Bronx to Manhattan. It was a sunny summer afternoon when I first noticed the numbers tattooed on my grandfather's forearm. "Is that a tattoo?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "Do you know what it's from?" I shook my head. He smiled. Growing up the grandchild of Auschwitz concentration camp survivors, you don't hear blissful stories of your family's history. You hear stories of death marches and cattle carts, of blood-stained streets and gas chambers. Out of my family in this picture, the only one to survive was my grandfather, the little boy in the bottom left. And yet, 2 generations from the extermination of nearly every branch of my family tree, and a migration from Germany to refugee camps here in France, to the United States, my family's culture has proven resilient. I fall back on my cultural community in times of trouble, and I celebrate our traditions and cultures every chance I get, from learning how to bake bread from my grandmother to dancing with my grandfather. This passing down of tradition, the resilience of culture, is my legacy and my responsibility. The importance of cultural heritage to not only survive shock events, but to thrive in the future, is a lesson that has been passed down from my grandparents, to my parents, to me, to the next generation. And for the last decade, it has inspired my work in uplifting cultural heritage against our generation's greatest existential threat: climate change. Climate change is the fastest growing threat to cultural heritage across our planet. 1 in 3 natural heritage sites are spiritual connection to our landscapes, and 1 in 6 cultural heritage sites, from Petra to Angkor Wat, is at risk of being destroyed by floods and fires. Now, these are catastrophic numbers, but they're just that. They're numbers. So instead of talking about some of the most spectacular sights of our world, I instead want everyone to close their eyes right now. Go ahead, close your eyes. Looking around, okay? Everyone's closed their eyes. Now, I want you to bring up your culture, your heritage. What is the place that matters most in this world to you? Maybe it's your hometown. Maybe it's your parents' hometown, where you fell in love. The bread you bake with your grandparents or your children. Think of these things that connect you to generations past, present, and future. Does everyone have that place, that tradition, that culture? All right, open your eyes. You might look around at ChangeNOW and think that these contemporary innovations, these new technologies, are what will allow us to thrive in a climate-changed planet. And they are, but they are only part of our solution. The places, stories, and cultures that were just in your heads, those are your cultural keys to resilience. They are what will allow you to thrive in the future. We need to rethink what critical infrastructure is. To survive and thrive in a world defined by extremes, we need to prioritize our sense of place, our cultures and traditions that will allow us to absorb shock events and bounce back as a community. Damage to cultural heritage that comes from severing our sense of place is demoralizing in the short term and catastrophic for resilience in the long term. I know because I have seen that damage firsthand. In my first National Geographic project, America's Eroding Edges, my research partner Eli Keene and I spent 2 years traveling across the United States and US territories. We interviewed just over 350 local leaders to understand what climate change was to them. And while we went in thinking that we would hear about destructions of bridges, sewers, critical infrastructure, leaders moved past that quickly to talk about the loss of the food that connected them to their culture, to their community centers where they danced and sung. They talked about losing the things that made them who they are. And so that got me thinking, how do we, instead of focusing on transforming critical infrastructure that we currently think of as essential in climate adaptation, to create a more expansive definition and include cultural heritage as a priority for funding, for the best climate science, and for action to make sure that those places that are so critical to us as humans have a future. And this is what has inspired my current project, Preserving Legacies. With an awe-inspiring team from across the planet, Preserving Legacies is on a mission to empower every community with the technical training and resources to safeguard the places that matter most to them. In partnership with the National Geographic Society and the International Trust of Monuments and Sites, we are working with dozens of cultural climate custodians to ensure that they know they are climate heroes, safeguarding the tools of our species' resilience for generations to come. Preserving Legacies is built on 4 main pillars to make sure that local leaders understand how to connect their communities to climate science and local knowledge so that they can have the best possible view of the future by understanding climate models and listening to community members on what the most important values are in their heritage to prioritize. Preserving Legacies then enables these local leaders to lead a climate risk assessment of their site, combining science, local knowledge, and community voices to create a plan of what to save first, what matters most to community members, and what the best approach is to adapt cultural heritage to climate impacts based on their local context. We then ensure that they don't feel alone, but they are connected to one another across continents in a global community of practice where they are able to exchange successes and failures and share questions with one another as they are adapting to the climate crisis. And to inspire people like all of you to join us in this movement, we uplift these cultural climate heroes as storytellers so that they can share the stories of not only their work, but their communities to inspire others to safeguard the places that they love. In 2024, we are working with over 20 cultural heritage sites around the world, from Colombia to Ireland, from Togo to Fiji. We are creating a global network that is prioritizing cultural heritage as our species' critical infrastructure. But here's the thing. We can't stop at 20 communities. We need 20,000 communities. Cultural heritage has a place in every part of climate action, from using historic buildings to mitigate carbon emissions, to safeguarding our keys of resilience to adapt to our future of extremes. We need to prioritize cultural heritage in each of our minds as we think about climate action. And so here is my request to you. No matter where you are in the climate movement, prioritize culture, prioritize heritage. Think about how your traditions, your sense of place, your cultures can integrate and uplift your work. Now, I know oftentimes when you see cultural heritage in the news of the climate crisis, you see buildings falling into the ocean, the streets of Venice flooded. It can look hopeless. And I sometimes feel hopeless when I read a climate report, when I witness what it means to lose the things that make us who we are. But hope is a cool emotion. It is future-oriented. You can feel hopeless today and be hopeful about the future, because in between these 2 points in time are our actions. If we choose to act, if we choose to safeguard our cultures, together we can transform the climate movement and create a climate-resilient future. In a few months' time, I will celebrate Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. Every year on this holiday, we remember those who we lost, and we pledge never again. We pledge to pass down our lessons from one generation to the next. In Hebrew, we call this Lador Vador. In a word, it means resilience. I hope you will join us in passing down cultural heritage as climate resilience to the next generation by following us on social media and by emailing us to join our movement so that we can give a future to our past. Thank you.